Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is speaking out about his decision to end his presidential campaign. He sat down with Tucker Carlson. RFK Jr. said there's political realignment taking place. Let's listen.
And the Democrats, for a variety of reasons, and I watched it happen over many, many years, have clung to this illusion of these democratic institutions that they're still democratic and handpick a presidential candidate without any elections to basically get rid of democracy in order to save it.
Now, RFK Jr. had a hard time getting on the ballot in some states. Now he may have a hard time getting off. According to NPR, the independent candidate could face challenges having his name removed in some battleground states like Wisconsin and Nevada. That's because some states have already begun printing ballots. Here to discuss what's next for RFK Jr. is Tony Lyons, the co-founder of Super PAC American Values 2024, which had been working to support RFK Jr.'s campaign. Welcome back, Tony.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So what do you make of this decision by RFK Jr. to drop out of the race and endorse Donald Trump? I ask this as someone who really wanted him to stay in the race. I think there were some issues he brought into the conversation that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump don't bring in. Now it seems he's in Donald Trump's camp. What do you make of it?
I think that this decision is a game changer, both for Trump and for him. That, he's been deplatformed in so many ways by the DNC. That they've worked so hard to, rig the media, rig the primaries, rig ballot access. They sued him in 11 states and were kind of teed up to sue him in 18 more. They rigged the debate process, the polling, everything. I mean, every aspect of this process, they either rigged or tried to rig. And they spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars to keep him down and to shut him up. And I think that what's happening now is that he's getting more of a platform. And the ideas, the things that he really cares about, which are, children's health, chronic disease, getting us out of the foreign wars, and free speech. Those are key things for him. And he believes that he's going to be able to fight for those principles more now than he could before.
And, it was a self-defeating effort in some ways by the Democrats to keep him off the ballot, to challenge him in state after state, including New York, to have an entire task force dedicated to making it harder for you to vote for RFK Jr. Because now he's getting out of the race. He's endorsed or semi-endorsed Trump, endorsed him in the swing states, and encouraging his voters to vote for Trump. It was probably better for the Democrats to have him still on the ballot and still actively campaigning, at least in the swing states, if he was pulling, he was pulling some from both sides, also pulling from independents, from people who weren't and are not going to vote for any of the major party candidates. But it looks like on balance, his presence was dividing a little bit of the right more so than people for Harris. So now they've gotten rid of him, and he's actually getting behind Trump. And if it makes a difference of a couple thousand votes in the swing states, that could be the whole election.
Yeah, it really doesn't make any sense at all what the DNC did, if you think about it, because they didn't really look state by state, which they obviously should have done, to see where Bobby Kennedy helped them, where he hurt them. And on the show with Tucker, he was saying that on balance, he really believed that he was helping Kamala Harris, that he was pulling votes from Donald Trump. So, they had no real plan here other than to just fight against any kind of a third party candidate. And it was not just Bobby Kennedy. They were going after anybody else. So they just so fundamentally don't believe in the democratic process and don't even really care whether they win. And I've been saying that all along, that they didn't seem to have any plan. So they should have looked state by state. Where does Bobby Kennedy help us? Where does he hurt us? What does he really stand for? I mean, does the Democratic Party want to be the party that is pro-war, that is against free speech? I mean, these are the kinds of things Bobby talked about. Do they want to say that they don't care about children's health, that they don't care about chronic disease? I mean, what is their problem with Bobby Kennedy? What is their problem with all the third-party candidates? And it just looks like they don't care at all about democracy. They just want to win at all costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, we've seen what they were willing to do in terms of challenging the ability to vote for RFK Jr. in New York, for instance. In a time when Democrats say that democracy itself is at stake in some broader philosophical sense, and yet they didn't want him. And the Trump people were complicit in this too. They agreed, Trump and Biden, to not have RFK Jr. in the debates, and the mainstream media went along with that, even though at the time he was polling in some of the polls within the range of what you had been expected to need in order to be included under the rules they were not using. They weren't using those rules anyway, so they could have included him if they wanted to. What does it say about the level of discourse in America at this time that someone who was speaking on social media sites, on podcasts, RFK Jr., I appreciate, came on this program a number of times. We'd love to have Trump or Harris on if they made time for us, but RFK Jr. actually did. But someone that mainstream media institutions were much more unwilling to give a fair shot to.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's really been shocking is that they've kept him off. They've, censored him. They've used propaganda. They focused on all these crazy stories about the bear cub, him, whether he ate a dog, which he didn't do, whether he had a brain worm that was hurting his brain, whereas we all know that he's just so incredibly sharp and has such a great memory, and that he's so physically fit. But, using all of these tactics just to kind of shut him down, keep him quiet. And, what they found is that, they should have been careful what they wished for. So having Bobby Kennedy now dedicated to working hard to get former President Trump reelected, should have been the worst possible outcome for them. They should have really thought that through, and clearly they didn't.
So what do you make of what RFK Jr. said in that sit-down interview there, talking about Democrats not being aware that the institutions that we have in this country are undemocratic? How do you see a Donald Trump presidency handling that, bringing about more democracy within our institutions in a way that, Democrats aren't or won't?
So I think that he's taken the first step, that he's been willing to reach across party lines and to try to unify the country by bringing in Bobby Kennedy, bringing in Tulsi Gabbard, talking to a lot of different people. And he said that he's willing to put Bobby Kennedy in charge of some really important things, like, the children's health issue. And if he really does that, and he's talked about that for many years, he talked to Bobby Kennedy in 2016. So if he's really serious there, that I think is a big breakthrough. And that's something that Bobby Kennedy has said he's clear that the DNC would never do, that Kamala Harris really wouldn't do, that she is connected to, funded by, and on the side of these big pharmaceutical companies, these big agricultural companies, that she doesn't really care about public health, about children's health. So, Bobby's thought there is that Donald Trump is a much better bet, that he seems sincere and he's taking real action.
I understand what RFK Jr. did, given that in our winner-take-all system, it's so hard to obtain any degree of political influence, even if you're an independent or third-party candidate with a sizable following, as RFK Jr. had. He's not going to get, unless you get the majority in the Electoral College, you win the whole shebang. If you have 5 or 10% of the vote, that's not worth 5 or 10% of the representation in government under our system, the way it is in some parliamentary system. So I understand why he's trying to leverage, what he does have for influence over Trump. At the same time, what would you say to, a kind of frustrated RFK Jr. supporter who liked RFK Jr. because of the things he stands for, and thinks that while Trump does overlap on some of those things, the free speech commitment, the combativeness with the deep state or the bureaucrats, all to the good, but disagrees with Trump on a lot of other things that Bobby Kennedy has disagreed with him on as well. What do you say to that person who's now in the position of not having their candidate in the race anymore?
Yeah, I would say that, you never get everything you want. And, one of the things Bobby Kennedy is saying now is that we have to love our children and our own health more than we hate each other. And that, the politics of division has been destroying this country in recent years. And so if you can really come together on the issues that we can agree on, then we can make real progress in this country. And it's so clear that the Biden-Harris team engaged in what a federal judge said was the worst case of censorship in American history from the day that Biden came into power. And so if you don't have free speech in this country, then you really don't have any freedom at all. So sure, Donald Trump is an imperfect person, and we know Bobby Kennedy disagrees with him on many things. I'm sure that a lot of people who really love Bobby Kennedy disagree with Trump on many things. But on the fundamental things like children's health, chronic defense, chronic health problems, the endless foreign wars, those are the things that we really need. Those are the fundamental things. And on those things, Donald Trump and Bobby Kennedy see eye to eye.
I'm a little confused as to how we square this policy-wise, right? Because it is true that Donald Trump is also taking money from large insurance companies, agribusiness, specifically crop production and basic processing. Some of his top donors include Boeing and Lockheed Martin. So he's supported by the military-industrial complex, by big agriculture, and by, big pharma. So how do we think policy-wise he'll be different from Kamala Harris? Because I do see some of her policies around regulating corporations that have gone out of control, and she seems better for consumers in the working class because of those policies. What specific policies do you see Trump supporting that makes you believe he will be better than Kamala Harris beyond just who donates to the other guys?
Sure. So I think that the key point is that he's willing to include Bobby Kennedy in his, inner circle, in his transition team, in the decisions of who to bring in, who to hire, who to have in charge of the CDC and the FDA and the EPA. And those are critical decisions. And Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have chosen insiders for all of those kinds of positions. They've been colluding with big corporations, letting them fund, letting them influence all of our government agencies. So to the extent that Trump is willing to let Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and other people come in and have a strong voice, then I think we're going to get better people in those positions who are going to make better decisions that are better for all Americans.
Tony Lyons, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.